Again, the title for the sermon tonight is Go. Now, I've become very familiar with the word go since I've decided to become an adult. I go to work, I go to school, I go get groceries, I go out of state, I go home. I'm not the only one that goes, though, right? We all go. We all seem to be constantly going to do something. We go to bed, we go out to eat, we go lock ourselves in the bedrooms while the kids are clawing at the doors, We all are going. Now, when we say we are going, what are we going to do? Well, it's always to go complete some sort of action, right? We never go to do nothing. And even if we say we are going to do nothing, we've got to get to where we are going to accomplish the nothing we're going to do. Do I say that again? No, I'm just... As a society, we are constantly going. We are on the go. Now, it wasn't that different in Jesus' time. People were constantly going as well. Jesus himself seemed to always be going and doing. It's just human nature, it seems. So it wouldn't surprise us when we read that Jesus speaks in ways of going. He spoke of seeking God's kingdom, seeking the lost, choosing to go the narrow way, go the second mile, go to offenders, follow him, go, and complete an action. Perhaps the most famous go command is the Great Commission. In my experience, Matthew 28, 16 through 20 gets the most attention, but there is a Great Commission located in each gospel. And we'll read Matthew 28, 16 through 20 now. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. And when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always and to the end of the age." Now, I've heard numerous lessons on the Great Commission and how it applies to us as individuals, and I'm sure you have as well. How individually we can fulfill the Great Commission by constant study and prayer with fellow believers and people as we go in our lives, to help struggling Christians in their faith and to become or even support missionaries to take the message of Christ to people. We all know what we ought to be doing to fulfill the Great Commission individually. But what about the church as a whole? How does the church go? What should be being done by a church to make sure that they are going? What does a Great Commission church even look like? These are questions that I've been thinking about for the last couple weeks, and I want to answer them in a strange way. I'm going to answer these questions by asking more questions. And I think that these are some basic but very important questions that a church should be asking themselves to see if they are going, to see if they are fulfilling the Great Commission, to find out even if they want to fulfill the Great Commission. And I would like to share some of those questions that I've thought about with you this evening. The first question I believe a church should be asking themselves concerning following the Great Commission is the church creating disciples? Is the church creating active believers that are in turn creating active believers? Believers in Jesus Christ, mind you, not believers in the church. If the mission of a disciple is to go and make disciples, then a church ought to be making disciples. In March, I was in Alabama for Bible Talk, and I got to set up the Bible Talk booth next to a group called Antioch Initiative, and their entire goal is church planting. And do you know how they do it? They train disciples and they send them out. One of the men from the booth, his name is Don Myers. I got to speak with him and have lunch with him. He told me this: you can build a church, and hopefully over time you may get a disciple. But if you make a disciple, you will get a church. And that has really stuck with me, because to me that is an extremely powerful statement. It makes me look at myself internally. Do I have a disciple mentality? Titus, are you a disciple? Now let's say, hypothetically, something happens to a church. Not just this church, anybody who's listening or visiting, just the building that you attend. Something happens to it, and you're not able to repair it, you're not able to rebuild. Did that church create disciples? And by that I mean, would people take it upon themselves to meet in their homes or to meet in a public place to worship with each other? Would they make sure to take communion every week now that no one is preparing it for them? Would it still be a priority to teach their children about Jesus and God and everything they've done for us now that we have to come up with the curriculum? Whereas where we would invite a stranger into church, because that's a little more comfortable, would we now invite strangers into our homes to learn about God? These are certainly not all the things that disciples do, but they're core things that disciples do. And so my point is this, with that analogy. If a church were to lose its building, would it continue to produce disciples, or would the church die when the building died? Now, I'm not trying to be cynical or tear anything down, especially not here in Choctaw. I'm just simply stating the truth that truth-teaching churches should be creating disciples. And therefore, a church must ask themselves if they are creating disciples on a regular basis. If you're going and you're making disciples. The second question that I believe is important is, where are we going and where should we go? Most churches have a missionary or a couple of them. They support their missionaries and programs from even other churches. And these are fantastic ways to be going to fulfill the Great Commission. But where's the church as a whole going? Jesus says to his disciples in John, he is sending them out. You get the idea, they are to profess as they go. Matthew and Mark record that he told them to go into all the nations. And then Luke, Jesus says, go into all the world. So if we are sending missionaries to places like Haiti and Mexico, where are the missionaries here in America? We know for a fact America needs Christianity. That's another lesson, though. But if America needs Christianity and we know it, where are the missionaries? Where are the missionaries in America? In your state? In your town? Well, the church is the missionary. So where should the church be going? Where they are, their communities. Now, I'm not saying we all pack up and go over to another community that needs it. It looks like it needs it more than we do, and minister to that community. I used to think that. I don't believe that anymore. But that is not this church's responsibility. For example, Choctaw Church of Christ is responsible for the Choctaw community. Hera Church of Christ is responsible for the Hera community. Spencer they're in charge of Spencer, and so on and so forth. I believe our duty and the mission is to be in our communities. That is where a church that wants to fulfill the Great Commission goes. And there are ways to tell if we are in our communities. For example, a church in its community should probably reflect its community. Let's take, for example, diversity. And I'm going to use Choctaw as an example, mostly because Choctaw is what I'm familiar with. This is where I worship. So according to the U.S. Census Bureau, in July 2018, Choctaw, Oklahoma had 12,624 residents. 83.4% of those residents are Caucasian, leaving 16.6% that are non-Caucasian. That doesn't seem like a lot of room for diversity in the church, but if you break it down by the numbers, and these are just general numbers, not a lot of factors in here, there is room, actually. So mathematically, 16.6% of 12,624 would be 2,096. I rounded up because it's been a full year. So we have 2,096 non-Caucasian people in our community. So if we look at the numbers in the church and we apply the numbers in our community to the numbers in our church, what does it look like? We have an average of 300 to 400 on a Sunday morning. So I went with 300 on here just to be safe. So 16.6% of 300 is 50. I rounded that up. It came out to 49.8. By the numbers, we should have a more diverse Sunday morning than we have. Sunday evenings, we've been averaging about 120 people. 16.6% of 120 is 20. Again, it's by the numbers. We should be more diversified than we are on a Sunday night attendance. Now, again, this is a study about the Great Commission, not about numbers. I know that there are many other factors that we can be putting in here, and I would love to do that. Maybe not after church, but, I have an office. We can meet up and talk about it. But I'm also not saying that we should go and specifically target non-Caucasian people. That's an awful idea. What I am saying is a church's mission field is its community. That is where the church goes. If a church is going into its community, then a church should look like its community. And if a church doesn't look like its community, it's not anybody's fault but their own. Again, it's not Harrah's fault. Harrah's not in charge of Choctaw community. It's not Eastside's fault. Eastside's not in charge of Choctaw community. And that applies to every church in the whole United States. I'm not just picking on us. Again, this is the church I'm familiar with, so this is where I'm applying it. So in conclusion, I believe another important question a church should be asking themselves concerning its fulfillment of the Great Commission is, where are we going and where should we go? And the last question I believe a church should ask themselves is this: are we willing to go and let go? I'll explain. Say a church spends time creating disciples, teaching and training in Bible study, character development, song leading, putting classes together, going out into the community and evangelizing. If a church is constantly doing that, that is a fantastic ministry. Now, hold on to that thought real quick, because let's also say that that same church has two couples that drive 45 minutes from a town that has no church to attend your worship. If you as a church are producing disciples consistently and you see a need for a church plant 45 minutes away, are you willing to let go of some of your disciples and plant a church where it is needed? Are you willing to go and let go? A church down the street or from another state calls us, right, and says that they really need our help. They've lost a preacher or a song leader, a Bible class teacher, you name it. There's hundreds of needs in a church. They're in dire straits and they need a permanent replacement, which sounds far-fetched, but I hear stories, about people traveling out of state so that they can preach on a Sunday and then coming back and doing their job, or people who move to a different church because there's a skill that is needed there that they can go and fulfill. You hear about things like this more often than not. Are we willing to go and let go of these members that are core members here, but somebody else needs them? One more I found particularly interesting was I was reading a blog. I actually sent it, I read it for a couple days and then I sent it off to Mike Coghill, where the writer suggests that churches maybe even give up their buildings. He states a truth that I've seen myself, and that's not for free. You don't just give your building away. But he states a truth that I myself have seen, that many dwindling congregations often have a building and real estate. So say there is a church in the community that is growing but doesn't have a building. Your church is dying and has a building. Would you be willing to sell your building to them? Or maybe even sell your building and your real estate and apply that money to a church plant. If 12 of you are meeting in a giant church, you can meet in a home, and you can take those funds and you can apply them to further the kingdom in something that is growing. Are we willing to go and let go? So far, we've covered 3 questions I believe a church that wants to fulfill the Great Commission or wants to figure out if they're fulfilling the Great Commission should ask themselves. And it is, are we creating disciples? Where are we going and where should we be going? And are we willing to go and let go? I'd like to give a few suggestions to just the churches in general, asking themselves these types of questions. And we'll start just down the line like we did, disciples and so on and so forth. If you don't know if your church is creating disciples, listen. Is anyone talking about it? Is it a topic of discussion amongst brothers and sisters, amongst the church leaders? I believe discipling should be a very open thing. It's not reserved for just the staff of a church. It is required of every disciple in Christ. And it should be a main topic of discussion for 2 reasons at least. I only need 1, but we're going to use 2. Jesus commanded it. In the Great Commission, Jesus commanded disciples to go and make disciples and baptize them. That is the Great Commission. That's everything. And then 2 is if disciples are not produced by truth-teaching churches will die. That's not me just trying to be rude or mean. It's just the truth. Now, if you want to learn more about discipling in a church, you can try out discipling programs. There's Google, everything that you can think of. But it's not that hard. You just find you find something that teaches the truth and you try to apply it. You talk to your congregation or maybe even ask for the help of a church that you trust and is using discipleship programs successfully. You don't always need to have a program, but sometimes that gets the ball rolling. And just one last thing about disciples is that I got to talking with a gentleman when I was in Pepperdine, and he attends the Alameda Church of Christ in Norman, and they were stagnant for years. And then they decided that they would set a 5-year goal and dedicate their entire church to discipleship. And it didn't happen overnight, but they started to experience a revitalization in their church and in their community. Their church experienced growth, and the members became more involved. Was it because of the program? No, it wasn't. I believe it was because they started to bear fruit. They saw that they weren't creating disciples and creating believers that would create more believers, and so they changed what they were doing, and God blessed them. Second, how does a church go into their community? Acts 2:42 through 47 says, "And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers, and all came upon every soul. And many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles, and all who believed were together and had all things in common. And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved." So how does a church go into their community? Well, we have to start by becoming a community. In Acts, we just read that they spent most of their time together, day by day, at the temple, in their homes, helping one another out. They were selling their possessions. They had all things in common. They praised God together. And what was the result of that? Well, they had favor with all people. I don't think that was just favor with all people that attended their temple. They were a community. They saw that they were doing good, and the community in turn had favor with them. To be in a community, the church has to be a community. And second is find a need and fulfill it. What does your community need, and what can you as a church do about it? Does the community need a recovery program? Does it need a little cleaning up around the neighborhoods or the parking lots? Is there a homeless issue that needs to be addressed with compassion? Can we hand out free Bibles at Walmart? I'm not trying to get all Jehovah's Witnessy on everybody, but those guys are working. They are working. I mean, how great would it be to hear a community say, man, that church does great things for our community, instead of, oh, I didn't even know that church was there. There are so many things that a church can be doing to minister to their community. And if we are being a positive presence in our communities, we will have favor with the people there. And lastly, are we willing to go and let go? I thought about having suggestions for this one, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. Myself as one individual, I cannot speak for an entire church. I would like to think that most churches would be willing to go and let go, but you never know what a church is willing to do until they actually go and do it. So if I had to give a suggestion, I would say start talking about going, and keep talking about going. And finally, just go. And you'll find pretty quickly if you're going to be supported or not. So in closing, I hope everyone understands that this lesson in no way was meant to be negative to any church, especially Choctaw. But my hope is to get churches to examine the fruit that they may or may not be producing based upon the Great Commission. My fear is not for healthy churches, but it is for those whom healthy churches are not reaching. It is not about the bodies in the building, it is about the souls in heaven. So I encourage all churches to examine themselves. Pray about your fruit. Talk about the importance of going now so that we can talk about the importance of going in the future. So if you have a need tonight, you're more than welcome to come down as we will have our invitation song. If you're not comfortable with coming down front, please grab somebody you are comfortable with. Just because you have a need and are scared to come up front doesn't mean we don't want to help you. Somebody will point you in the right direction. So whatever your need is tonight, please come and let us know as we stand and as we sing.